What's up YouTube, and welcome to another draw along with me, where today we're going to create this really beautiful cave design with this beautiful sunset happening in the distance. As always, there's links to everything you're going to need in the description down below. With a design like this, it very much is a matter of trusting the process from start to finish. So if you follow along with me, I'm sure you'll be able to create something really beautiful. And as always, be sure to share your designs with me over on Instagram when you're done. If you didn't already know though, you can support me over on Patreon, where you can also get 3 more exclusive tutorials every single month if you are a Patreon supporter. I'll leave a link in the description down below. With all that said, let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is create the basic shapes for the scene, and then we can flush them out with details later on. So in our layers, we'll have an empty one to start with, and you should now have the palette for today's design. We're going to go ahead and grab this color here. It's the 5th color on that bottom row. We're then going to go to our selection tool. I'm going to go to rectangle and make sure color fill is turned on, so tap it and it will turn blue to let you know it's turned on. And we're going to go ahead and draw in the sand layer that's going to sit at the bottom of our design. So it's pretty much halfway in the middle of our canvas. We're just going to create a box like so, and it will fill it in. And you can grab your cursor if you want to, grab freeform and just make sure you hit the orange line, there you go, to let me know I'm nice and central in the middle of the canvas, so a nice and even top and bottom. And you can do that by turning on snapping here in the bottom left. Tap on your cursor when you're done. Then we're going to go ahead and go to that layer and swipe it to the left and duplicate it. Grab your cursor and move it perfectly straight up till we move it into the top half. So this is going to be our sky section. Tap on your cursor when you're done. Then go to your colors. We're going to go ahead and we're going to grab this blue here. So it's the 4th color on that top row, and drag and drop it into that top space. Next, we need to create the cave that we're going to sort of situate ourselves in. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors. And we're going to grab this color here. It's the 1st color on the 2nd row over here on the left-hand side. And we're going to go to our brush library. Under calligraphy, we're going to use the option of the monoline brush. And the brush size doesn't really matter too much. Now, the only thing I am going to do is I'm going to tap on my monoline brush and go to stabilization. Because for this particular example, I'm going to reduce the amount of streamline down. I'm going to drop it down to about 20%. I'm going to drop down the stabilization as well. We want something where we can create some nice bumps and lumps to create a nice rocky surface. So you need to go back and potentially just pause there if you need to adjust yours as well. So what we're going to do is just over here, we're going to start to create our first part of the cave area. So we're going to start here, just a little chunk down from the horizon, create the first part of the rock here as it makes its way down, and then from here we're just creating a little bump there, let that roll outwards to create like a bit of a rock. If we then take a look up into here, we can kind of repeat that a little bit more, so another kind of little boulder, we can let that come out as well. And then towards the top up here, we can go ahead and just create a little bit of rock that just runs across the top. So that's going to be our left hand side, and we can adjust that shortly if we need to, but for a second I'm going to go ahead and make sure I've linked up my lines, which I believe I now have done. So now I've filled that in, I can drag and drop the color into that space. I can take a look at how that looks, and the only thing I'm going to do is move mine off to the left hand side. We don't want it too big that it impedes on the design in any way, so we want it kind of situated off to the left like so. What we're then also going to do is on another new layer just for a second, so we're going to create a new layer. We're going to kind of repeat that on the right hand side. So we're going to create another rocky surface over here. So we're going to come across here and then create like a nice rocky curvy wall. So these are all like random little boulders that are just coming out from the side of the profile of the wall. We're then going to create a nice boulder up here in the top right. And we're going to create a bumpy, lumpy kind of rock that's going to sit in front of here. So we've gone edge to edge, and likewise at the bottom, we're going to go around here and drag and drop our color into both those spaces. So they're on separate layers, and that is your cave pretty much done. And again, just take a look, maybe just move that slightly off to the right hand side. We don't want too much of a frame that's going to take away from the inside center. So tap on your cursor when you're done. We're then going to go to our layers and create another new layer and drag it underneath those 2 that we made above. What we're then going to do is go to our colors, and we're going to grab this color here. It's the 3rd color from the right hand side in the middle row. And on this occasion, I'm just going to make my brush a little bit bigger to about 3% this time. Brush doesn't really matter too much. I just want mine to be a little bit smoother on this occasion. And now we're creating a second layer of rock. So I'm going to come up here, and then I'm going to sort of let that just run in behind here. So I'm going to go right to the edge just to make sure. And I'm going to round off the bottom as well. So I'm going to undo that one. I want it to be a little bit more rounded, like so. Drag and drop the color into that space. And then we're going to create a really cool, very jagged sort of set of sort of spikes here in the cave up here at the top, and just let that roll out all the way to the right hand side. So make sure your lines go edge to edge, just fill them in if you need to, and drag and drop your color in. And then over here on the left hand side, we're just going to add in a tiny little bit here, so a little sort of spiky point here. Just let that run off to the edge as well. Likewise, your starting point, just let that run off to the edge so you can drag and drop the color in. And then just in behind here, we're just going to implement a little bit of more rock here, and then go edge to edge. So from that point, just go to the edges. You can turn off the layer above if you can't really see what it is you're working with, but then drag and drop the color in like so. So now your cave should look a little bit like this. You can see the sort of difference between the colors. They're very subtle, the differences, but you can just about make it out, the change in those two tones. At this stage, we want to take a look at our rock work and just see if there's any adjustments. And truthfully, at this point, I don't think there is. So if you want to try and match up to mine as you can, that'll be awesome, and we can crack on with the rest. Now the next stage is to go ahead and create another new layer, and this is going to act as the rock that sits on our water. So just here, it's kind of our main focal point. So we're going to drag it down. We want it to be in front of the sky, of course, and in front of our little sand layer. We're then going to go ahead and go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here in the bottom left of the palette, and we're going to draw in our next rocky shape. Now I'm going to go back up to my brush library. I'm going to go to my monoline brush again, and I'm going to change my settings back up. So I always have streamline turned up quite a bit. I'm going to make my stabilization around about sort of 35%. This will just allow me to create a bit more of a smoother shape, and because this shape is a little bit further in the distance, we don't need to add quite as much bumps and lumps, because of course it is a lot further away. So therefore we're not going to see all those micro little bits of detail. Whereas up here, this is very close to us as a user looking at this design. So we're going to go ahead now and draw in the next one. So I'm going to reduce my brush size back down to about 2 or 1%. And we're going to start off by creating the rocky feature. Now our sun's going to sit here. So I want to create a kind of a shape that kind of looks like this a little bit. So the sun can just peek in from here. And this is kind of the shape we want to create. So just bear that in mind with your own. So I'm going to create a little rock on its own first of all. And then we're going to create the main island. So we'll just create that little smooth little flick up from there. We'll just run it up into a nice point potentially. Even flatten that out at the top a little bit more. Now you can spend as much time as you like designing your own and how you want it to look. And we can always adjust the size of the layer. So right now mine's looking a little bit too big and off to the right. We'll adjust it in a second, no problem. Let's then come around the base of this shape, creating the rocky work underneath. Once you've created a shape that you like, just drag and drop the color in. Then grab your cursor. Use the uniform option so you keep it all the same perspective, and just scale that down. We don't want it to be too big. We want some nice space for some clouds in here. We also want to block off the horizon line just here, so we're going to move it a little bit higher, such as there. Tap on your cursor when you're done, and then just make any adjustments. So for example down here, I'm just going to block this out a little bit more. This is just personal preference, but I don't like to skip anything in my tutorial, so you don't see anything that jumps and changes and think, why has he done that, without any explanation. And I think that looks pretty good as that is. We're then going to go to our layers and create another new layer. We're going to drag this one underneath that shape that we just made. And we're going to create another little sort of rocky space over here. So just going to create like a little rocky island over there. Just let that run across like so. And drag and drop the color in. Now I want to create a little bit of a gap here just to try and show that there's a gap in between these two islands. So what I will do is go back to my original island, grab my eraser and tap on it, and change the eraser to say calligraphy and the monoline brush. And we'll just chop away at it, just creating a little bit of a gap. You can maybe even move it across if you wish, but I know what I kind of want to create, and I'll show you exactly that, which is a little bit something like this, where we just have like a little avenue where the the water can make its way round these two shapes. So this one looks a little bit further back, and we can actually go back to that layer and maybe just chop off the bottom, forcing it to go a little bit further back in our perspective. You see the difference that makes straight away? It looks a lot further back. So there's those shapes. And then finally, we need to go to our layers. We can come down to here and create a new layer. And we can use the same color as the extra areas around here. So we can use the first color in the middle row. And we can create another little rocky shape down here. So we're going to create a little rock. This is going to be right next to us as the user looking at this. And we want to go right to the edge. And then we'll just create some little bumps and lumps. Something a little bit like that. And then drag and drop your color in. Now really, you could maybe grab your cursor and just move that off to the right, just so we kind of create a little bit more balance. And tap on your cursor when you're done. And then we'll just create some very small little sort of bits of the rock that are somewhat sort of planted in the sand here, just down in front of us. We'll create a couple of these. You want to make sure they get a little bit smaller as you make your way back. And feel free to also grab the eraser and just chop off the bottom of them. Make sure we fill in those gaps. So what I mean is you can go up to your eraser. If you've still got the monoline brush, you can just sort of chop into the bottom like that. Get rid of that rounded edge potentially that the monoline can create. You could even do the same here too. So just chopping into there. I'm going to grab my brush again. I'm going to create another couple of little shapes down here. And I'll go back with the monoline in a second, the eraser, and just get rid of the bottoms of them. I think I'll create one more here. Drag and drop the color in, and then grab the eraser and just chop away into the bottom, create a different shape, and chop away to the top as well. That may give you a nice different variation on the shape that you created, but a little something like that. And that's the basics of our entire scene we now need in order to progress on with the rest of it. So that's the fundamentals. We can now move on, and the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is work on a little bit of that sky in the background. We are potentially going to return to different layers throughout this tutorial, so just bear that in mind. Now this blue shape here, we're just going to tap on it and we're going to rename it, and we're going to call it sky. Now for a moment, we're going to start to address some of the layers in terms of their names as we meet them, so we can make sure we're all referring to the same layers correctly. So on this layer, we're going to go ahead and tap on it and we're going to alpha lock it. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to use this sort of top row area here. And the first color we're going to grab is in fact this one here. It's the third color on that top row. We're going to go to our brush library. We're going to go to airbrushing and the soft brush. We're going to set that soft brush up to 100% opacity. And we're going to make the size around about sort of 17%. And we're going to gloss from left to right, especially towards the bottom, pressing a bit firmer. And then as you start to get up towards that middle point, just let that just blend out a little bit. So we're just blending the color from the pinky sort of tone into the blue. Leaving a little bit of that sky there at the top, stroking from left to right. Then grab your colors, grab the second color on that top row and blend into the pinky purple color we just made. So just blending that in, left to right. So you'll end up with like lots of stages. You'll have the blue, then the pinky purple, then into this orange. And then we go to our colors and we grab this yellow here in the top left of the palette. Maybe have to reduce our brush size down to about 10% and just go along that horizon line very lightly and blend that up into the orange. So more so towards the bottom is where the yellow sort of needs to live. Just a little bit like this. And then we're also going to go to our colors and grab this blue here. It's the third color on that top row from the right hand side. I'm going to go back up to around about sort of that 16% mark and just blend that in at the very top. So just blending that in. I want to sort of introduce this sort of night sky at the top here, which is going to look really nice later on. And then we can always now go to our colors and let's, for example, reintroduce this color here. Sorry, the third color on that top row from the left hand side. Reduce your brush size down to say something around about sort of 4%. And we can occasionally just brush in the odd little streak of this color. So I'm being super gentle. So let me put my opacity back up. Super gentle just to blend in a couple of streaks here and there. Just to sort of break up the gradient. So it's very subtle. You can just about see it. It's very, very subtle. We then want to go to our colors and grab this color here, the second color on that top row. and do exactly the same, but I'm going to reduce the brush size down to 3% this time and just brush in some streaks of orange through the sky into the purpley section, maybe the occasional one up here in the blue. That's fine too. That will just nicely sort of break up our little gradient, make it look a little bit more realistic. Brush that in on either side. You can see little patches of colour start to build up, and we're just pushing from left to right. Don't be afraid to also just bulk out a section. If you've managed to sort of add an area that looks like it's got a good amount of colour, just add a little sort of rounded sort of pebble shape of colour to it. That'll nicely break it up. And then revert back to your colours and grab, say, this one again, the third colour on that top row, and just streak in the orange area maybe, just to break that up a little bit with some more of the purple tones. Again, don't let the purple only live down there. We can brush that into the blues, especially up here towards the top. We can just add in a couple of streaks here and there that break up this sort of sky area up here. We'll end up with a nice, beautiful, streaky sort of sky like this. You can also go back to your colours and grab the darker tone here on the right hand side and maybe just brush in a couple of streaks from the top. You don't want to come too low though, because if you come too low, it's going to be very evident with this colour change because it's quite dark. So just a couple of streaks towards the top will just nicely break up that top area. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to this rock area here and start filling out the details of this. So with our frame, pretty much, of rock, we've got two layers that we created. Now we can turn off the bottom one for the moment. So we go to our layers. This layer here is the one in the back. So it's the one we created all the spikiness from, and you should end up with your two sides on either side. Now, initially we set them on two separate layers, but we're going to go ahead and pinch the two layers onto one. We're going to tap on the layer and we're going to alpha lock it so we can no longer paint outside of it, keeping everything nice and tidy. And we're going to start painting inside of that. So we're going to call this, rename it, we're going to call it front rock frame. And then if you do the same, we'll know what to refer to. And then we're going to go ahead and start using the leatherwood brush. So we're going to go up to our colours first of all and switch out to this colour here. It is the fourth colour in the middle row. It is then time to switch our brush out to the option. For me, it's under artistic, but yours will be under imported right at the bottom. And you want the leatherwood edited by Procreate. Now this brush is set to 75%. And the size will fluctuate as always, but we're going to sort of start off with something around about 4 or 5%. And we're going to start off by blocking in the colour nice and quick, nice and easy. So we're going to follow sort of the curvature of the rock. Now this grey is very light, so I'm kind of coming around the edge here and curving underneath. Then underneath here, just following the curvature of the rock shape that you've made. We're trying to splash in some colour before we hack away into it and get rid of it. These are all kind of foundation colours, so you can just about see what it is I've tried to make there. We're then going to go ahead and continue that all the way up. So you need to bear in mind what your design looks like and try and start to think about little sort of ledges and where things sort of maybe layer on top of each other. So I'm creating a curve here, but then this area here, I'm going to sort of make it nice and big up here as if it sits somewhat in front. And then you also want to bear in mind that you want to create little ridges up here. So maybe angle your brush a little bit different. So come down, across, let the brush do some nice random splattering of colour. And the angle of your brush is quite key. You want to keep it quite consistent with the direction that you want to send the rock in, kind of. And you can almost see there, I've kind of created a bump without having actually to do very much. We're kind of just giving the user the impression that there's another little bit of rock here. It's not just a completely flat surface. And then up here too, we're going to come across here and we want to try and make sure that this bit here sits in front of this bit here. So we're going to do exactly that. We're just going to block it in and let the brush do the work, lightening up the sort of edges more so than the rest. You can already see that kind of rocky colour coming to life a little bit more. We then want to go ahead and move over to the left hand side. So if I start at the bottom, for example, we've got this little boulder here and another one above it. We want to kind of show that this one maybe just sits a little bit closer to us, so therefore we're going to patch that in first, and then this one here kind of looks like it's a little bit further back. So I'm curving round the rock face, just following the same curvature of the rock, varying up my pressure, but mainly brightening it up on that right hand side. Likewise here at the bottom, we can sort of run the colour across here, for example, just to block out the bottom area. And again, this is all going to get sort of erased and hacked into, so you can see I'm not spending too much time on it. Now, I don't really want you to either. We're just going to block in some colour. We're going to come around this boulder here too. Make sure that's got some nice direction to it. You're trying to create the impression for the person viewing this, what kind of shape it is. We're creating another one up here in the top area, and I can run that right to the edge, which makes this little bit of rock that's left look like it just sits in behind. See, it's all about sort of making it very clear what sits in front of what. Now that is some very basic sort of rock, and take a look at each side just to make sure you sort of balance it out a little bit. What we're then going to do is just very quickly move to the lighter tone. So it's the colour underneath it, and it is the bottom colour in the 4th column. I'm going to reduce the brush size, what was 5 or 4, down to 3. And then on top of our grey that we just made, we're going to add in the lighter tone. So I'm going to just scatter on top some of this, and again brightening up that left hand edge, which is where the sun is about to kiss this bit of rock. Just creating the same curvature, so following my lines. I've got a little bit here at the bottom that I've got to follow too. And again, the brush is going to do all the work for us, so we're just going to scatter this colour into here. I can remember that I sort of came across down into here, pushing this rock in front. There's another little sort of rocky ledge up here too. Add in the odd little random streak as well, just to create another sort of bit of rock that's catching the light. We then come across the bottom area here. Now this is all very much the same process as I did in my waterfall design that you'll be able to see on the screen now if you've not already done this one. It's available on YouTube that you can do, but it's very much, you've got to trust the process. We're going to build in foundation colours, and then we're going to hack away at them before we add in the main highlight colours. So it's all about creating the impression and creating lots of detail without having to do a lot. Now, because we set this to 75 or 70%, the brush, it's going to leave lots of residue, and every time you draw on top, you can build up multiple layers of tone by doing very, very little. I'm going to add in the odd little scratch here. So we're very much sort of adding this in very quickly, because now what we're going to do is we're going to switch back to the base color of this shape, which is this color here. It's the middle color in that first row. We're going to make our brush opacity exactly the same, but our brush size, it's going to go down to about sort of 3 to 2%, so a large 2%. And then we're just going to start to hack away into this. So by doing this, by literally sort of scratching over the top, you can start to see that we're leaving lots of residue left over. So for example, here is a good example where we've chopped away onto the top of it, but because the brush is set to 75%, we've still got 25% of the original color we painted in there. So we're building up lots of tones on top of one another. And by doing this, we're creating shadows as well. We're creating nice shadowy spaces. So follow the curvature of your rock, potentially just angle your brush a little bit different to that curvature. And by zooming all the way out, you start to get the impression that it's a lot more rocky and not quite as just a big block of color. We're going to do the same down here. So just follow the sort of shape initially, scratch away into these areas here. I keep calling it scratching, but that's kind of my impression of what we do. We're kind of scratching away on top of the surface, breaking it up. And I'm going to make my brush size even smaller. I'm going to go down to a smaller 2%. I'm going to try and refine this edge, making it sure it's very clear that that is a rocky area. I'm going to come across this at a slightly different angle to the angle of the curve. I'm going to also just hack away into this area here, trying to leave this some space here to breathe. And at the top here, almost just erasing a lot of the work, scratching all the way over the top of it, not being too precious with what we leave behind. And by zooming out again, you're creating a much rockier scape. And just compare the two different sides when you take a look. This will kind of give you what it is you should be looking for. And if I, for example, actually scratch over the top a little bit more of this, break that up a little bit more up there, you can get the impression, especially from this area to this area, this is very soft and sort of very feathered, but this is very bumpy and lumpy. And of course, that's what we want from our rocky shapes. We're going to go ahead and go back into this area up here and start hacking away into it, kind of just creating curves. I'm going to give this one some space again, just in behind there. I'm going to follow the curvature a little bit of this rock before then alternating my angle and just hacking away into here, creating little grooves and bumps and lumps. And again, the brush is creating all this randomized detail for us. And that's the best bit about this. We're going to just hack away up into here. So we're going to follow the curvature a little bit of this shape before then alternating our angle and just scratching away into it. Getting rid of some of the stuff more so towards the left hand side a little bit more. Likewise down here too, so we're going to come round under here and darken that up a little bit. Follow the curvature of the shape a little bit before alternating the angle. Just giving it a good amount of coverage, leaving lots of residue behind because we still have to add our highlights on top in a second. Zooming out, you should end up with a much more sort of randomized look to everything. And you can repeat that step. So you can, for example, go back to your colors and grab, say, this gray here again. It was the fourth color in that middle row. If you want to take a look at an area and think, well, this area here, for example, doesn't really have much detail going on anymore. Add some more gray. Go back to the bottom color in that same column. Add in some more gray on top. Don't be afraid to do this multiple times. So only until you get the right impression that you want. I'm going to add in some more grey here just to flush in some more space. And then just switch the colour back. Go back to the middle colour in that first row. And then just hack away into those areas again. And see what impression you get left with. Maybe leave the odd bit of lump of colour. That will look cool. We can hack away onto that area. And you're creating more and more detail. So spend as long as you feel is necessary, but I'm really happy with how that looks. We're going to move on to the highlights of this section. Now the highlights, if we go to our colors, is in fact this color here. It's the second color in the second column and also the one just beside it. So we're going to start off with sort of two different tones. So we're going to make our brush size around about that 2% mark. And we're going to start adding in some highlight on these edges. So we're definitely adding in some highlight on this edge where the sun is starting to kiss straight through. So just adding it on top. So now we've got the grey underneath as a really nice foundation. And then we've got this grey, orange even, on top of that grey, should I say, to add in some beautiful highlights and lighting. So if we zoom out again, you can kind of get that impression of the sun just sort of glancing onto there. Don't be afraid again to just add in some colour into these areas because we will of course hack away into this in a second as well. So be nice and random. The brush size, if you're interested, still is 2%. And I'm going to add in some areas here of colour. And again, your pressure, because we're at 70%, when you start to go over yourself a few times, you're going to leave some areas here with some really nice different multi-tones of the exact same orange. But because it's at 70%, when you overlap it a couple of times, they layer on top of each other, you end up with some nice bright rock. We'll do the same up here too. So we're going to come around here. Now we do want to slowly but surely start to bear in mind how our sort of stone lays on top of one another. So for example, I'm going to come around into here, make this bit a bit orange. I'm going to leave a gap here between this ledge up here. I want this to be far more prominent and I want it to sort of very much be obvious that it sits in front of that space. So just a little bit of colour in here too. Just letting that sort of sit in front and you can get the idea for how this all stacks on top of each other then. We're going to go ahead and add some colour onto this ridge here too. Fluctuate your brush between 2 and 1% and just add in some colour on certain little bumps and lumps that you can see have been left over from our sort of hacking session. So down here there's not really too much, but you could occasionally just create something. So like a random little curve like this. Another little bump and lump here, another little bump and lump down here that's a little bit brighter, catching a good amount of sun. So basically creating lots of little curves, lots of little sort of semicircles almost. Just up and down here. Creating some nice curves. These are going to be our nice rocky edges. Like so. You can already see that detail starting to sort of make its way through. And as I mentioned, just up here, just start to define lots of little edges again that are just going to catch the light and create lots of random little journeys. So just random little sort of lines and stuff that You know, we're defining the rocky edges a bit more. Try and use the grey of the previous sort of hacking session in there, but you want to kind of start to carve out some extra details and different little ledges and bumps and lumps in the rock. That looks great. That's what you should try to aim for. So a little bit something like this. So the brush now is going to sort of remain at that smaller size, about 2% or 1% should I say for now. I'm going to come around this bottom edge here and I'm going to follow up into that grey area. I'm going to create a curve underneath it too and just let that colour start to build up some really beautiful highlighted edges. You can leave some nice and skinny like that, so they're nice and just very small areas, they're just catching the light, and then you can compare it and contrast it, should I say, to larger areas such as this one. I'm going to come around here. You can link these little random areas that we're creating into one another. You can leave gaps in between, create random little splodges of colour, and even just a little sort of curve, like a little sort of semicircle like that, or a little C shape. That's fine. That'll add great amount of detail. That will add a nice little just random blob that's catching the light. And the thing I love most about this brush is its randomness and scattering allows you to not have to spend too much time creating these details, because a lot of the time it's going to do it for you. So that's that kind of right side done, and I will go back now and just make my brush size 2% and just try to very lightly just sort of gloss in a little bit more orange on these areas, just add some of that smudged look so it's a little bit more consistent to down here. And likewise, I'll just add some more in there too. We're going to go ahead and move round to this edge here as well, so still at 2% as we just adjusted, creating some random ledges. I'm going to keep this one relatively simple and quite skinny with detail. Not going to add too much in there. Maybe the odd little blob there. And move straight onto this rock here. Coming down here. Following the curvature of some of these beautiful grey areas that have been left in behind. You can, again, manufacture new areas if you want to. So just adding in some extra colour under there. Don't be afraid then to make your brush size down to 1% again and just flush out these areas, creating more defined edges. So we're jumping between 2 and 1% at the minute. Random little ledges that are catching the light. Take a look at your other side always, just to make sure, because it's very easy to start to add in lots more colour, but if it doesn't balance up to the other side, you kind of like started to get a bit carried away, or vice versa, you may have not added in enough. So we're going to go back to 2%, and we're going to start to go around that edge, looking at our grey areas, looking at what is going to be sort of cast in the light. Scattering on that colour a little bit more like that. Making sure that this edge is a little bit more sort of colourful. And don't be afraid to vary your angle of your pen as well. So come across yourself a little bit. Come across the rock. That way you're going to create like flat edges on the rock rather than just following it around like it's a boulder. You're going to create more detail. So start off initially like this, you know, sort of creating the curves and following the body of that rock. There's another little bit here too and here too. And then just start to sort of go a bit more horizontal occasionally. You'll create nice flat ledges. It'll vary up the texture. It's all nice and random, and that's the way we want it. So nice scatterings of colour down here. I'm going to create some nice colour on here too. Little scatterings of colour. Taking a look at the other side. Now, of course, I need to go back in with a 1%. So I'm going to go back into my sections now. Start to just create random areas of colour. Block out areas a little bit more. Just sort of filling them out. Making them look a little bit more bold. Again, don't get too precious over this because we are going to hack our way into it in a second with the base colour. So at the minute it's just kind of still working on foundations essentially, but foundation highlights more so. And that looks okay from that side. We can now go ahead and go to our colours. Grab the middle colour in that first row or column again. And let's make our brush size around about that 1% mark. And we want to start hacking away into our highlights. So we're just going to come across it. So come across the design now. Don't sort of try to follow the curvature too much. Come across, break up those edges, we want to create some really nice little random, tiny little shadows in here. And don't be afraid just to give it a good gloss, like a good gloss with the base color. Break it right up. Because again, when you zoom all the way out to here, it looks like a fantastic amount of detail. When you're in here, it just looks like we're sort of stippling on top of it. So just bear that in mind. Again, try not to, as I always say, try not to get lost in the details. We're just going to give it a nice scattering of color so that when we zoom out, we created all that detail for ourselves. Again, we're going to give this a nice good coat, breaking up this area here. We can hack away into certain areas a little bit more. You don't want any color really up here in the top right, because that's not where the sun's going to make it round, kind of thing. I'm going to break this ledge up a little bit. I'm going to hack away into here as well, creating a separate little space. Come across over the top. Again, when you zoom out, it looks great. We've got so much detail going on in there. We're then going to go across at the top too, giving everything a nice scattering. And don't be afraid just to create random grooves. So just like, you know, carve in a line here and there. It doesn't have to be horizontal, it can be vertical. But every time you do, you're creating more ridges, deep ridges in the rock that's going to really give it some character, give it some depth, some 3D look to it. And you saw a second ago, I was literally just hacking away into it. So again, we're just going to go over this. This has got quite a slim area of light, but like just creating a little gap here kind of shows that maybe this bit here is actually facing us. And this bit here is just about facing sort of in between the light and us. So that way it's getting a little bit of light, but it's not going to be overly powering compared to the section next to it. So just hacking away into this now again, breaking it up with the odd little hack into there, just creating a more of a contrasty look to it. And then going to go ahead and make sure we add in some nice groove lines in there. In these areas too, we've got to be brave. We've got to get rid of our work a little bit. But truthfully, if you like it, leave it. But this is the process of this kind of thing. We're building up all that color. And still, we've got grays from the very first level that we added in. Then we've got the light grays, and then we've got the oranges. And again, zooming all the way out, we've got this beautiful amount of detail in there. Let's then continue to create our space here. Now I want this underside under here actually, in fact, just to be a little bit darker, like it kind of faces us rather than the light source. So I'm going to just create a little bit more of a shadow in there. I'm going to give all this a really quick coat. I'm going to vary up the angle, go a bit more horizontal, because this brush tends to like to run in lines as well, so just bear that in mind. Hack away over to the top of all of this. Even lots of detail. Get rid of some of these areas towards the left edge. They may just ever so slightly be catching the light, but not too much. Create some nice curves in here. Create nice little bumps and lumps. Create gaps. You know, just the odd little scattering of colour that's just catching that sunlight. And when we zoom out, this is what we should end up with. Something really beautiful and detailed like this. We've got this beautiful rocky surface all drawn in manually. Then the next step is to add in what I would call sort of the final highlight colours on top. So we're going to go ahead and create a separate layer just for a moment and tap on it and clipping mask it down. We're going to go to our brush library and we're going to go to airbrushing and the medium brush. We're going to make the opacity still 60%, but we're going to make the size really kind of small, about 1%. We're going to go to our colours and we're going to use a couple of different colours here to add in some highlight tones on the rocks. So we're going to kind of fluctuate between this orange here and this sort of more red tone here. So we're going to grab the orange to start with. I want to sort of transition our colour from top to bottom where it's a little bit more orange towards the top areas and a little bit sort of more red towards the base. So I'm going to zoom in on the top right up here. And as I mentioned, I want to transition the colour down. So what I'm going to do is with my brush set to about 1 to 2%, I'm going to just sort of squiggle on some very light sort of light fuzzy highlight on here. And if anything, I'm going to reduce my brush size down to 1% and just start to literally squiggle and scratch on some highlights. So you can see literally if you zoom in on the shape that I'm actually creating, it's extremely random and just jittery, shaky, and we're just creating some of the very more punchy highlights that just catch in that lighting ever so slightly. So we're just coming across these edges here. scratching away, creating nice zigzag lines, and we'll come back to those lighter, larger sizes in a second. These areas up here, not so much, because they are not facing our light source quite as much. We're going to come around this area here, and just, you don't have to fill out the whole area, but just the odd little squiggle here and there. Just little zigzags that are definitely facing our light source, especially these areas under here. You know, they're very much facing the sun, and they're going to really cast that beautiful bit of extra highlight on top of our rocks. Little squiggles, little squiggles. This is kind of the techniques you kind of want to master a little bit with a design like this, of like building up the foundations and then going in with your very fine, minimalistic kind of highlights. So they're kind of very few and far between almost, but they really add in that really beautiful look of the lighting onto these rocks. So like little squiggles. You can make areas a bit more chunky with the lighting if you want, it's totally up to you, but because it's rock as well, you can get away with that really squiggly look. Zoom out, take a look at both sides, make sure you're kind of sort of matching up a little bit. Over here, I'm going to start to, bear in mind in a second, I'm going to transition into the other colour. I'm going to add in some beautiful highlights on these rocks. And as I start to get towards the bottom of this rock, I'm going to stop. I'm going to just add in the tiniest little bit on top of here, which I will overlap in a second with the other colour. So we've got some nice, sort of very fine details on there. We also want to go ahead and then make the brush size around about sort of that 2% mark, go back over them with the tiniest little light coating, and I'm pressing so light, you may even want to reduce your brush opacity down to say 14%. That's pretty good if you're pressing quite firm. We're kind of just diffusing out the lighting a tiny bit by just going over the top of it with this larger size. We're kind of just spreading out that much warmer tone in these areas, so just overlapping it a little bit more with like 14% full sort of pressure down, just diffusing the lighting a little bit, spreading it up and down the areas nearby to where we've added in those little squiggles. So we kind of already did up there. We're going to add in a little bit down here too, just on this edge. And I'm going to go back to what we had. So it was about 75% and 1%. And just squiggle in some colour here too. I just about missed that. So that's going to add in some really beautiful brighter edges on there. We're then going to go ahead and make our brush colour this one here. It is the 5th colour from the right hand side in the middle row. We're going to make the brush size again 1% and do exactly the same as we did before, except now we're just using a different tone. So I need to make my brush size 1%, nice and small, and add in those squiggles. So here where we added a little bit of orange, overlap that orange with this sort of more red tone. I want to create like a nice gradient, so I'm kind of going back over some of the oranges into that middle rock area, just trying to blend and transition the colours between the orange and that sort of more pinky tone. So again, just squiggling over the top of these areas here. This is a much less harsh colour, so just try and go over your areas a little bit more, concentrate a little bit more colour in those areas. Nice little squiggles on these areas. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for all the big blobs of the orange that we added in before, and just seeing if I can add in towards the right hand side that's facing the sun, just a little squiggle of colour, just to show that that is the brightest part on that little highlighted area, and it is very much directly getting a good glance of colour. There we go, we've done that left side. We'll do the right hand side as well. So just over here, overlap some of the orange with some of this nice pink colour. Again, you can do it up towards the top as well. Just sort of squiggle over the top of it just to take a little bit of colour out. And then here, this rock here is looking really good. I'm really happy with this one. We're just squiggling over the top of them. Squiggling that pen. Adding in some really nice highlights on these edges. Squiggling in. Hope you're enjoying the tutorial up until now. This is quite a big chunk of this design, the rock work, before we get into the rest. So this will be sort of the longest period of the tutorial. And again, let's go ahead and make the brush size a little bit bigger, about 2% again. And again, just overlap some of that color. Now I'm going to keep my opacity high. Again, you may need to drop it down to 14%, but I'm just going to very lightly with my pressure instead, just sort of overlap these areas a little bit more, just diffusing that lighting a bit more. It's going to create a bit of a lighter edge on that left hand side there. And blend that in to there too. Move this across as well over onto this edge as well, so just very lightly adding in some diffuse lighting on those edges that we made. Again, blend it up into the orange as well if there's a section that you think you can add it onto. Very lightly just scattering in some nice light colour. Don't be afraid to sort of fill it out a little bit as well. And then of course we're going to hack away into it. We're going to go back to our colours. We're going to grab the first colour in that middle row. Go back to your brush and switch it back to the Leatherwood by myself. Brush size can be 1%, and we're just going to hack away. Now what this will do is this will actually create some really beautiful shadows, because we've got the sort of the main highlights in there now. By just giving it sort of an overlay over the top, you're going to create lots of very fine levels of detail, because we've got our main highlights, but we've also then got the very sort of contrasty shadows to it as well. So I'm going to sort of hack away under here, scratching in some grooves. So just trying to vary up my pressure a little bit, which will vary up the hack into the rock, creating a very different look in there. Again, zoom all the way out, and that's the goal. That is the goal, to zoom all the way out, take a look at the detail, and just hack away into everything, just leaving a very beautiful rocky surface. Now we are going to go back in later on and add in like a light glow, but for a minute this is what we want to try and do. So we're just going to hack away into these areas again. It's all about building up that process, building it up. I'm going to actually just be quite quick with this area, just sort of hacking away into it, creating random ziggy zag lines on top. We want to break it up. We don't want it to be all highlights. Highlights always have to come with shadows. So by adding shadows, we are giving it a good amount of contrast. And contrast is what really catches a user's eye. Going back over all of that, breaking that up, adding in some really great detail. So you really have to, with this particular type of design, not get too attached to what it is you're purposely adding in, because otherwise you will end up sort of not wanting to get rid of it. But that is the whole point with this particular style. So you can't have too much of a love for certain areas. If you do though, leave it. Just make sure it kind of fits in with the styling. That's all we need to try and do. I'm really happy with how this has all looked. And just look at the difference between this side here and this side here. It's got a really soft, hazy look to it. And again, we're adding more and more of this little sort of small detail of the hacking away part, which is breaking it up and creating so much detail. It looks fantastic. I'm really, really enjoying this style of painting at the minute, because the brush is doing all the work for us. And as I mentioned in a previous tutorial, otherwise if you were to draw this in real life without painting, proper painting, then you would have to meticulously drop in each little bit. We're lucky enough with the Procreate space that we can do this like so. Now that is one huge section done. We now have to move on. And the next section is to work on the rocky frame underneath. So if we go to our layers and we turn that on, that is the next one. So we're going to kind of repeat the process, except we're going to keep it nice and quick on this one. So we're going to go to this one and we're going to call this one the second rock frame. So just to give you a reminder, if I zoom out, you can see on the left hand side it is this extra bit here of the cave. So we're going to go ahead and tap on this layer and we're going to alpha lock it. We're going to go ahead, still using the Leatherwood, we're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab this one here. So it's the fourth color in that middle row. Now because this is obviously a little bit smaller, we don't have to do quite as much time on this area because it's a little bit smaller. It's not our sort of, we can't really see all of it. So just bear that in mind, that we don't need to spend too much time in this area. So about 4 or 5% should be your brush size for this gray. So again, the gray is the fourth color in that middle row. And we're going to go ahead and just gray on that side there. Going to create some nice grey areas under here, so just letting the brush blotch in some big grey areas. Got these beautiful little points here which I want to sort of really keep emphasized, so I'm just kind of creating little grooves that I think will nicely sort of highlight them a little bit more. Here we go. Move across, follow the curvature a little bit more of the shape. And then this one here is very hidden, so we don't have to do too much in there, just a little coat. And again, we then go back up to our colors and we grab this color here. It's the bottom color in that fourth column. Make the brush size a little bit smaller, down to 4% this time, and go over the top of those grays again. Again, highlighting more so the left-hand edge, blocking in some nice color, layer it on top, and then again start to bear in mind what you want to highlight. So I want to, you know, create this rock, this part here, kind of sit in front of this little peak. So I'm going to sort of bring that down. I'm going to create a nice little ledge in here too, like that. I'm going to come down this sort of peak here, this point, like so. I'm going to do the same here as well, a little bit like this, and then this point here too. We're just going to go around that edge, layering on top the color, creating that nice rock look, and then again move over to the left hand side. Our highlights are all facing inwards, so always facing inwards, because that's where our light source is. And then again we're going to come down this edge here too. So a nice scattering of grey, quite quick and easy on that one. Again, we now go to our hacking session, so we go ahead and grab the base color. It's not this one here, it's this one. It's the third color from the right hand side in that middle row. Let's make the brush size around about sort of the 2 to 1% mark. Start following the curvature of the shape where you want to start to hack into it, and then just very lightly just continuing to just over the top. I'm kind of varying up my angle now, going a bit more sideways, create different ridges in there, leaving in that nice little bit of grey. And again, let's do the same up here. We're going to follow this curve here. I'm going to follow this shape down towards the edge. Come around here and then start to hack away. Leaving a bit more of a ridge line there. I'm going to do the same here too. So I'm going to just create a little bit of a gap, some breathing space between these sort of peaks here. See that? A little hack into there and a little hack into there. Vary up the angle, go sideways, go backwards and forwards. So you can kind of go that way and then go the opposite way, and that will create some really nice detail in there. Again, we're going to go sort of across at this angle and then at this angle too, breaking up that rock. Nice and easy, nice and quick and easy on this occasion. On this side too, we're going to go up and down the shape, following kind of the angle, and then change up the angle. Come across and then come across again. Even a bit more rock. And then here it's such a skinny sort of spot, we can just basically go from left to right, leaving a little bit more of that lighter tone towards the right hand edge. And that's it, that's the greys done. And again, we're going to move into the opposite colors. However, the highlights are different on this area. The highlights are not this orange and this color here. We're actually going to use these couple of tones over here. So we're going to use, first of all, this one and this one. So we're going to grab this color here first. So it is the fifth color in that middle row. We're going to make our brush size around about that 2 to 3% mark. And again, add in our color where we want it. So more so towards that left hand side, creating little bumps and ridges and whatnot in the rock. Blocking in the color. Again, don't get too precious over where you put it. The hacking sessions after will, of course, decide what shall remain. Let's then go across under here too. A little bit of color in there. Let's then also go underneath here as well. Again, we're going to add in some really nice soft lighting later on, but for now we want to create those harsher details. We're going to come around the left hand side of this peak. Create a nice little extra little ridge on top of it. You can add in some more on the opposite side too. Let's then move into here to just a little bit of color on this one. Before this one, the primary one kind of sits in front. Nicely just adding in that little bit of color on there. And again, we're kind of being a bit quicker with this one in comparison, but we're just going to block in some color. Lock in some colour, leave some gaps here and there. Definitely, of course, down into here. I'm going to add in some colour as well. So you want to end up with some coverage, a little bit more so like this. And then, of course, again, let's go back to our colours and let's go ahead and grab this colour here. The third colour from the right hand side in the middle row. Reduce our brush size down to a 2 or 1% and start hacking away. So again, we just come across at one angle. We then maybe hack away at another angle to create some really nice sort of detail in there, some contrasty areas. Create some ridges, so just create little random paths here and there just to break up the rock. And like so, you should end up with a nice little bit of detailed like so. Just exactly the same up here, create a little bit of a gap in between our areas just to create some breathing space. Hack away at the top of it, giving it a good overlay, and then come across it from another angle just to break that up. So I actually don't know how many times I've said all those phrases, but it's such a repetitive process that I hope it's not becoming across too repetitive from me saying it. But I always like to make sure that we reiterate each step regardless if you've already done it. So let's come across here maybe. I'm going to come across there just to create a little bit of gap in between those two peaks. And then up here too. I'm going to just give it a good nice light coat to break up the highlights. And then hack away at it from another angle, more vertical angle on this occasion. Breaking that up. Creating all those edges that are just being kissed by our lighting. And let's do the same over here. Give it a good nice coat. And then hack away at it from another angle. Hack away into certain areas as well to sort of force the rock to look at us a little bit. Down here too, I'm going to come across and also go across it from another angle as well. So we've got some nice cave walls there as well. The next step is to just add in some extra sort of highlights on those edges though. So we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here. It is the 6th color in that middle row. We continue with our brush as the leatherwood. And we need to make the brush size around about sort of 1 to 2%, if not 1 potentially. And let's just, in the areas where we've got some color left over, let's start splashing in some of this beautiful tone on top. This is going to be our highlight edge. So it's beautiful and soft. It's a really nice color. Adding in that little bit of color on the rocky edge. Again, we're going to hack away afterwards, so try not to be too precious. Let's then go ahead and in certain areas just add in a little bit of color. You can introduce areas again if you feel like the hacking into it has sort of got rid of too many sort of ridge lines and whatnot. Just add it back in. Lovely stuff. And let's do the same on here too. Definitely towards the bottom of the peak. Definitely a nice little bit of color on there for sure. And a little bit of colour on here too. Let's add that in underneath this edge. Add in some little areas that are just catching a little bit of light. Like so. Very pleased with how that's all coming along. Let's then also do the same over here too. So just little bits of colour. A little bit of colour under there too. And try and block out a bigger area maybe here. Just it's really facing our light source. Let's then also do the same down here too. Creating some nice colour in here. And a little bit on here too. So just adding in some colour in there as well. Not forgetting that area. Now I liked how I added a big chunk of colour there. So I'm just going to sort of find a little spot where I can just maybe really blast in some more colour. And then again, let's go back to our colours. Go to the base colour, it's the 3rd colour from the right hand side. Make the brush size nice and small, about 1%. Give your highlights a little bit of an overlay over the top. Break them up a little bit. Try to keep the left hand edges, well in this occasion the left hand edge, the edges that are facing the sun, maybe just leave a little bit of colour there. So just try not to overlap them too much. Just leave them a bit brighter. You don't have to go over everything if you like how it looks. So there's only a few areas here that I quite like the look of that don't need any hacking. So I'm just kind of chopping over the top of it again. Just seeing what we can get rid of. I love this big chunk of colour here, so I'm not going to go over it too much, but I'm going to sort of near abouts go over it, breaking it up a little bit more because the brush is so small at 1% as well. It's very minute detail that will only really sort of show when we zoom all the way out. So we're going to just go all the way into these areas here too. I'm going to create a little bit of a gap here by just darkening this up behind this rock. So here, just where this rock is, it's going to sort of darken up that left hand side a little bit more, just to create a little bit more of a gap. And there we go. Our cave now is done. We've done all the stonework for now. We'll come back to sort of highlights and whatnot towards a later stage, but we do have more rock to do, but it's this area here. So let's go ahead and zoom in on our little island. We're going to go to that layer. We're going to tap on the layer and alpha lock it. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to go ahead and start adding in some tones on this area. Now this area uses a lot of the colors towards the bottom down here. So all the way up to this color here across. So we're going to start with this color here. It is in fact the second color in that bottom row. We're going to go to 2% and we're going to start to split our little island here into two. So this side here kind of swoops down towards the left. So I'm going to create some nice swooping areas down towards the left hand side, letting the brush just drop in some color. But then this right hand side kind of swoops off down to the right. So it's almost like there's a ridge straight here. So we can start to bear that in mind. Try to start to direct the brush in those areas, just so that once we start to, again, hack away and whatnot on top, we're creating a lot of dimension and direction in the rock. So we're coming across down into here, down towards the water line, our rock here. We just go left and right on the tip of that. And then of course down here, all of the color just pushes down towards the right hand side. So I'm giving it a good amount of coverage there for a second, just to try and get the direction of everything in play. Now what we need to do is go to our colors. We grab this color here in the bottom left of the palette. We make our brush size about sort of 2 to 1%, and we start hacking away into this area. This is very important to sort of now start to follow your motion. So you kind of want to make sure that these lines here, I'm kind of creating like lots of little curves that are just making my way down towards that bottom left hand side, and then curving on this side too, to hack away at our foundation color, leaving in some nice directional lines in this space. Now I'm really hacking away at the top of it now because we've got loads more color that we're going to add into this area. So this is very much a process of just building that up. Now in this area here, I'm kind of getting rid of a lot of it, but you can already get the impression of where the sort of design is going with this particular section. So then we go back to our colors and we move on to the next color. We're going to move into this beautiful sort of maroon color. We're going to go back to our brush still, and let's make it about 2% still, and start to just add in some areas of color. So maybe this sort of, now we've tried to define some shapes a bit more. So maybe this area here kind of somewhat sits in front of here. Maybe give the left hand edge a little bit of color. Maybe we can start to imagine that there's sort of grooves in here, so they just kind of run down and meet all in this area here. We can create some color on that left edge off the very tip of it, so it's almost like kind of creating some more verticality in the shape now. Off the top area too. So can you see all those sort of lines? We've got a line that's here, we've got quite a vertical line off of this edge, another one that swoops down, but this line, and this line kind of swoop into and meet each other down in those areas. And let's add some color onto the top of the rock, maybe a little bit more so towards the right. And I'm going to go ahead and add in some color over here too, so we can add some vertical sort of shapes here. Let that run into this, so maybe we imagine that this line here just kind of runs all the way down into there. We can create some more vertical lines in here. Vertical lines, so just let it be random. Let it be random. Let the brush kind of let it scatter. But as long as you're kind of following the basic shape of the object you've drawn, all these lines will make sense. So we're then going to come across the top edge here, hacking away into this one. I'm going to create a little bit of color on there too. And that looks good. That's a good amount of coverage on there. We go back again to the base color in the bottom left of the palette. Make the brush size a bit smaller, about sort of 1%, a large 1%, and hack away into these. So these angles are all very much going that way, so I'm going to come across them a little bit with my sort of hacking into session here. I'm going to create some more grooves, but again, we're leaving this. You see, we've got 25% left of that color, and all of these are beautiful little layers of color that are going to remain. They're going to build up what looks like tons and tons of detail. Let's hack away into all of this space, leaving little streaks such as there. Let's make sure we give the whole thing a good coat, because we've got more and more colors to add onto this. This right hand side, you change up your angle. You see how I'm now pointing it down towards the bottom right, because again, that's the direction that the rock is going in. I'm going to cut across there a little bit more. I'm just sort of letting the brush see where it drops in, see what it creates, and then just go back in and say, okay, well, what do we want to adjust? I want to create a bit more of a gap here, and I want to darken up the left hand side because the lighting's on the right. So there we go, we've got some more color in here. We can maybe just chop away into that a tiny bit more. Create some more vertical grooving in here, which will nicely break up all those swoops down. And a nice little vertical sort of chop into will create again more elevation, more verticality to it. Let's then go to our colors. We're going to move into this gray now. So it's the fourth color on that bottom row. We're going to go to our brush, make it about sort of 1 to 2% again. And now this is kind of more like, I imagine, a bit more of a stone, just like the color beside it. So I'm going to grab that fourth color. I'm going to start to sort of drop in some nice bits of light gray, but a bit more towards the bottom. So we're kind of imagining that there's maybe a tiny bit of sort of vegetation on here, and it's more so towards the top, but towards the base is very much stone, as it's of course being battered by the sea potentially on a daily basis. Not much really grows in here, so it's more sort of stonework. So we're kind of following the curvature of the whole sort of shape. There's a couple of bits of stone in here that maybe just nothing can really grow on. And I'm going to come across into here too. We're going to add in little specks of this grey into these areas as well. On the right hand side, we can create a nice little ledge. So I'm seeing what's been created. I love this little ledge down here. So I'm going to kind of imagine there's like a bit of a boulder area there. And then in behind it is where this all runs into the sea. Again, odd little speck of stone in between will look fantastic. You'll just break it up. Again, zooming out, there's quite a lot of colour in there now. But if we go to the base colour again, which is bottom left colour, reduce that down to 1% again. Start to hack into the greys more so. And just creating some more ridge lines. So I'm actually going to make it even smaller, about 1%, very, very small 1%. And I'm going to just create some nice vertical lines in here, trying to break that up, making it look like there's lots of just breakouts of stone, the tiniest bit. Breaking that up. I'm going to go over everything again, because this tiny, tiny, tiny 1% is going to start to build up a lot of detail. Creating the line work that's pointing towards this ridge line every single time, and maybe even I can define that a little bit more by chopping away into there. Let's do the same down into here, so just giving this a nice hack away, pushing those lines down towards the base. Let's get rid of a few of it. It's potentially a bit too much of the light grey further up, but we can deal with it. We've got more colours to add in still, but again, reducing this brush size really, really small, continuing to go back over myself and back over myself and back over. We're really hacking away into it, leaving tiny, tiny little bits of rock that's so far away. Again, zoom out, take a look at what you've achieved, and then zoom back in and crack on with the rest. We've got loads more we can add in, so we're going to go back to our colours. We're going to grab this colour here now, the fifth colour on that bottom row. Brush size back up to a large 1% if possible. And then now we need to be very sparing where we add this in. So this is like a very sort of brighter rock look. So I'm going to sort of look at where I've got some grey, look at where I've got some maybe ridge lines, and just start to draw in some lines. So maybe here, just draw in a line that maybe runs all the way down to the sea. You can maybe add in some stone on here too. This is a very, very sort of important step in this, because this defines a lot of the edges. So a lot more of the grooves and running lines of the actual shape. So a little bit of a bigger block of colour here. I'm going to start to be a bit brave in this area here, just creating some more line work. Let's add in another line that maybe cuts across that one, and then they kind of meet up, break off from one another. That looks nice. I'm going to go ahead and add in the odd little speck of color here and there, taking a look at what we've got and kind of imagining the surface of how this rocky area looks, you know, kind of how does it sort of roll over down into the water. Do the same over here too. Adding in a little bit more color towards the top edge. Down here, I'm going to try and define a little sort of area that maybe just runs down in front here. And again, just kind of runs up. It's less exposed. Kind of just drop in a little bit more, this brighter tone towards here, because it's going to get some really nice lighting shortly. Following those beautiful ridge lines. And it's all about the angle of the brush. The angle of your pen will define where these lines like to live. And I'm going to add in some line work up here as well. So there are some very good directional lines. We can then go back to our base color, bottom left, 1%, very small, and again, standard procedure. We're just going to hack away over the top. That looks nice. Let's keep doing that. Let's make sure we still keep the sort of shapes that we wanted, but we just want to break them up. So just overlapping them with a good amount of the base color just to break them up, create very fine details in the surface over the top of all of these too. And then my brush size, I'm just going to make it around about sort of 2% and just very lightly gloss over the left hand side a little bit more, because this is going to be a darker side of our sort of rocky area. This is going to be the lightest side. Let's then go to our colors and start to think about adding in some of these greener tones. So this is going to add in vegetation now. So we're going to move to this color here. It's the 5th color from the right. And now we want to focus more of our sort of green area in this kind of area here. So kind of follow that sort of area. So we're going to follow the sort of the same shapes. So kind of following those lines down, but this is going to add in some nice grassy areas on the top. So we've got our kind of soil colors of the reds. We've got a kind of grays of the rock that sits in between the gaps. So this is going to add in some really nice greens on the top. Some nice areas, and then again as we get down towards the bottom, we maybe don't want to add in too much because it is of course not got much to live on because it's getting battered by the sea every day. So I'm going to add in some green. We can maybe leave that side a little bit blank and maybe add in some nice green areas down here where it's a bit of a flatter surface. It can maybe live a little bit better in this space. Standard procedure, we go back to our base color. We reduce our brush size down to 1% and we go over the top of it, breaking it up and kind of going a bit more horizontal. I think the green looks great at this stage because the green really adds in, again, that vegetation look. It's going to really start to make it look like there's stuff living on it. Break into this space here. And we should end up with a very sort of detailed rock. I'm zooming all the way out again and trying not to get lost in those details, and I'm really happy with how it's going. We're going to move into the highlight tones now, so don't worry, we're on our way out of this section. So we're going to go to this color here. It's the 4th color from the right hand side, and these again are our foundation highlights that we then build on top of shortly to add in larger highlight, so more precise highlights. So we're at 1%, nearly 2. Let's go to 2. And the highlights are going to be down this right hand side. So now at this point, just like the rock work, we're going to try and sort of identify where we want to start to create some nice ridge lines. Right over the top here, I want to add in a nice bit of light. Where the light just maybe creeps around, just a tiny bit over here that maybe just scatters over the top and just comes over that peak, just a little bit like so. Let's then go ahead and start to add in the highlights. Now I want the highlights to go almost to this ridge line here that we have the 2 sides. So this side very much then looks like it really does face our highlight, which is the sun of course. And we're just going to let the brush scatter around, see what it drops in, and then see what we can emphasize. So I'm creating some nice ridge lines that run across towards that middle point. Here on the top here we can add in some great color. Maybe just into here, just the tiniest bit, but more right on that edge, because our sun's going to live right here in a second. So we're going to add in that highlight in this space. Zoom out, take a look at what you got. See those little ridge lines? They look really nice. That's what we want to try and achieve. And we want to add in some highlight on this bit of the rock where the sun is just wrapping around, maybe even just a little glance of color just over the top here. That will look fantastic. That will really bring in the lighting nicely. I'm going to emphasize that a little bit more on the top. And then again, base color, bottom left, reduce the brush size down to 1%. Zoom in on the shape. We're just going to go over the top, break those highlight edges up, give it a nice good coat of the 1%. Try not to get rid of too much, because we are going to leave a lot of this area. Here I just need to get rid of a little bit of that because I'll need it to be right close to the edge. I'm going to just get rid of a little bit more into here. That looks nice. Let's then take a look at this area, give that a little bit of a coat. This area here, a little bit of a coat. Like so. There we go, we've got a beautiful highlight edge on there. Let's go to our colors and grab the brighter orange. So it's the third color from the bottom right. Brush size can stay at 1% too. Let's take a look at our ridge lines that we got left and start to paint in some brighter edges. So just follow those ridge lines that have been put in by the brush. Add in some nice brighter tones on top of them. And pretty much almost the whole right hand edge can, like the actual far right hand edge, can be like colored in a little bit, because that is where the light is really creeping around on top of this shape. I'm going to add in the odd little random scattering, just as I did there, where maybe there's just like the odd tiny little bit that's just sticking out far enough that we can add in some highlight on it, right on that top edge too, right at the top up here, scattering in some color. Got a nice big space here to work with, so we can add in some color on here. Beautiful bright tone. It's going to live on the top of this surface here. Lovely stuff. Zoom out, look at the detail, enjoy what you've achieved up until now. We've got a little bit longer to go, but we're creating some really beautiful detailed designs. Let me know in the comments as well if this is the type of design that you want to see more often. I always take the gamble to see if people like it, so you can let me know in the comments and get more content that you actually want to see. So let me know if this is something you want to see more often. And then again, we're going to go back to our base color, bottom left. Reduce the brush size down to 1% and hack away into it, breaking up those highlight edges. Give it a good nice light coat over the top. Create some gaps if you want to, certain areas like here, give it some breathing space. Here, again, we can create a little bit of a gap maybe just in the highlights there, just to break up the solid right hand side there. Giving our highlights a nice overcoat of the color. Blending it out more so towards that center point, just to blend that out where the lighting's just starting to not sort of travel around the object anymore. Get rid of it a little bit more at the top, a little bit more over here too, and a little bit more over here too. And there we go, we've got some beautiful detail on there. Zoom in all the way out. We've got more lighting effects to add in later on, but now we are good, and we can potentially now actually just sort of darken up the bottom edge just the tiniest bit, a little bit more where it gets closer to the water. Again, I don't want to skip over any step that I maybe make, but I'm happy with how that looks. We've got lighting effects, as I mentioned, to add in later. So for now, we're going to leave that as is. The next layer we want to work on is the smaller little island just beside it. We tap on the layer and we alpha lock it. We go to our colors. This one's going to be really quick. We're going to go ahead and grab this gray here. So it's the fourth color in the bottom row. We're going to make our brush size around about sort of 2%. And all we want to do is give the left edge pretty much a good coat in a color like this. Because this is so far away, we're not interested too much in super details. We're going to go back to our base color very quickly though, bottom left. Reduce the brush size down to say 2 or 1%. Give it a good light coating. And go back to your colors. We're going to jump straight to this color here, the fourth color on that bottom row from the right hand side. And start painting in some very nice orange on that left hand edge, maybe the tiniest bit down on the bottom right. Add in that color in, and then go to the brighter tone just beside it, so the third color from the bottom right, and just scatter on some color in this area too. Again, we've got more lighting effects that we'll add on later on. Then go down to your base color, bottom left. Reduce the brush size down to 1% and give it a good little scattering, breaking up that color a little bit more, creating shadows. Zooming out. That now faces our light source. Now where is our light source? Let's add that in. Let's go to our layers. Let's go down to the sky layer and create a new layer. Let's go ahead and change the layer effect from normal. We're going to scroll down to add. And we're going to make sure we tap on this layer and clipping mask it. We're then going to go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here in the top left of our palette. And we're going to go to our brush library. We're going to go to airbrushing and the soft brush. Now we're going to make our opacity a little bit lower in case you're heavy-handed, so 65%, and the brush size is set to 8. We need to add in our sun here, so we're just going to sort of in a circular motion, just round and round and round, get bigger and bigger, and block out the center, making it nice and bright. So we're going to go round again, just trying to paint in that sun spot right in there, and then go to your colors and grab this color here. It's the fourth color from the right-hand side. We're going to reduce the brush size down to 4% and just brighten up right towards the center where the sun will be. So a little bit like this. It's nice and bright, nice and white. We can fade that out left and right. And also maybe just push it the tiniest bit across the horizon line, left and right. So now we have our sky. What we can now do is go to our layers. We're going to grab the sky layer itself and we're going to swipe it to the left and we're going to duplicate it. We're going to grab the bottom one out of the two and drag it down in front of this layer here, which is our ground. So we're going to rename that layer. We're going to call it ground. And the sky layer above, we're going to tap on that layer and clipping mask it. We're going to go ahead and lower the opacity down to 50%. And then we're going to grab our cursor, we're going to zoom out and we're going to flip it vertically and drag it down. And make sure we go edge to edge, top to bottom. And tap on your cursor when you're done. Now that's going to act as our little reflection. There's lots more layers we need to add in here. That's going to act as sort of the foundation area here at the bottom. So now we have our reflection. With reflections and highlights also come shadows. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to tap on this layer and clip it also to these shapes. We're then going to go ahead and go to our brush. We're going to go to the medium brush. So under airbrushing, the medium brush. We're going to go ahead and set the size of it. We can make it around about sort of 2 to 3%. And the opacity is still 65%. Now what we want to do is in each area, we want to just sort of gloss left to right, adding in a shadow. So very lightly, and overlap yourself a few times so you can create different layers of the shadow. Bearing in mind, this is your light source. So you can always draw a line, like say here, for example, and then everything to the right of this line is pretty much something that you need to shadow. So take a look at what that guide did for you and then block in that shadow. So that's always an idea. You can always put that line on a separate layer so that you've always got it as a reference. We then also have our main subject here, which is this nice, beautiful rocky island. So we're going to try and just sort of create a big shadow underneath the base of it, nice and dark. And then just left to right, just create like a bit of a shadow that comes all the way up. Leave a gap here and there, like so. Also a little bit of a shadow underneath there. And then a shadow over here too, moving off to that left-hand edge. And a bit of a shadow in there too. Now don't be afraid to just put a little bit of a shadow around the base of these subjects where maybe the sand is ever so slightly sinking. Therefore we can just sort of give that impression a little bit more. Now I'm just going to add in some nice random scatterings of colour. I'm going to reduce the brush size down to 1% and just emphasise this sort of streaky effect a little bit more in this shadow area. I really want to sort of darken up into the sort of main column area here. You may be wondering what we're doing at this stage. We're just adding in a very basic scratchy kind of shadow, and we're going to start to blur that out in a second. So there we go, we've got our nice sort of basic shadow in there. We then go to our adjustments and we go to motion blur and we push from left to right and we'll phase that right out. That's going to look really nice and soft. It's going to give us that really beautiful look that we want. And I'm going to go up to about sort of 28% on this occasion. And I'm going to tap on my adjustments when we're done. And then take a look at your design. Maybe use the medium brush, but a bit lower opacity, again, if you're heavy-handed. But just start to just go in here now and start to just block out the shadows and make them a bit more prominent in areas that you need to. Bearing in mind we're not going to motion blur this again, so you maybe just want to sort of darken up these shadows, just the odd little streak in here, maybe around the base of this area over here. Just want to sort of darken that up a little bit more, making it nice and dark in here too, darkening that up, and over here as well, just darkening that up a little bit more, just so it nicely sinks into the ground. Next, what we're going to do is define where the sea is. So we're going to go to our layers and create a new layer and tap on that layer and clipping mask it. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab this color here. It is the bottom row and it is the second color from the right. We are using the Leatherwood brush, so edited by myself. For me, it's under artistic, and the brush is going to be around about the 1 to 2% mark. Now we're going to start to define where the water is. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start to just paint in left to right, making sure we keep nice and horizontal our sort of water line. Now we're going to come across a bit of an angle here, a bit sort of diagonal. We're going to add in some nice white that runs around the base here of this bit of stone. So we're just going to create that water line. We're going to block out certain areas with a little bit more of that color. What you can then do is just move over to your right hand side and just get a gauge for where the color is. Now I want this to kind of wrap and go a bit of a diagonal line, a bit more like that. So I'm going to have my sort of sea line just come in from behind this rock a little bit more, come across, and then we're going to leave a little gap. We're going to create a little breaking wave here. So there's a little bit of a sort of raise in the middle, a little bit something like this. We're going to go ahead and reduce the brush size down a bit smaller and maybe just have a tiny little line that's maybe the water making its way out back into that little wave. We're going to just let that just run in here. We're creating all the sort of watery sea lines here. Let that come across into here as well. I'm going to go ahead and create some more wave lines that just run a little bit higher. We're going to just add in some more breaking lines in behind this bit of rock too. So just where it's hitting that rock, maybe breaking off, adding in some very nice sort of horizontal streaks, the odd little speck here and there, just a little bits like this. Going to add in the tiniest bit that just runs in behind this rock too, just in the distance. It's just breaking around those edges. Likewise, just over here too, just a little breaking of the waves, a little bit of very light line work in here just to break it up, give some nice reflections. You can create some nice big sort of waves, almost not waves. We want this sort of to be a very calming scene, so we don't want to add in like big waves or anything like that, but we just want to show like little breaks in the water, a little bit something like this. So we've got that nice diagonal line and we're leaving all this nice reflective water in here. I'm going to go ahead and just add in some more breakages, especially over here where potentially there is some nice sort of rocks very close to the cliff edges. They're just going to break up our water line for us. So we've got some really beautiful lines in there. Maybe reduce the brush size to a really small 1% and just start to scatter in the odd tiny little breakup of color. So just adding in the odd little bit of streak here and there. We'll add in some really fine details. Scratching away a little bit into here. I love that phrase. Scratching away. Scratching away. Adding in speck after speck of just tiny little bits of detail. Maybe just in behind here. Just a little bit more over there. And really brightening up that edge that's really close to us. So just really kind of brightening up the water. As it rolls around, it's naturally going to start to fade into that shadow. So it's not going to come through too well, which is great. We want it to look a little bit more sort of darkened out in the shadowed areas. It's going to do all the work for us. There we go. We've got a nice water line there. And I think I'm pretty happy with how that looks for a second. We've got our sea area. Now, what of course we're going to go ahead and do is make the sea look a bit more blue, give it a bit more of a watery look in terms of the fact that it is, of course, separate from this sand area down here. So we're going to go to our layers, we're going to create a new layer and drag it underneath those layers that we just made. So the little highlight ledges there of all the water. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab this color here in the middle column on the far right. And we're going to go to our brush library and we're going to grab the medium brush under airbrushing. And we're going to start painting in that sea So we're going to go ahead very, very lightly, just sort of paint in a bit of a blue hue to it. This is just going to really nicely define those water edges a little bit more. Try and avoid your shadows a little bit where you've got the base of our little island there. Bringing in that blue, bringing that in, maybe darkening it up a little bit more towards the further stages of the sea as it gets a little bit further back. Definitely back here I can just start to think about darkening that up a little bit more, adding in a bit more of a streak here and there just to give off that blue impression. Maybe even reduce the brush size down to say 2% and just get a little bit underneath your water on the water line. What that's going to do is that's going to give a bit of a shadow almost underneath the water, which is going to make it look a little bit more realistic. It's going to give it that little bit of shadow. See, I'm just kind of running across the water edge there. And every time I do with the shadow, it's starting to appear underneath. Blend that out a little bit as well, where the water, just very lightly just fade that out on that edge. Zoom in out of that. Now the sea really does look like it is a separate object from everything that's in front of us. What we will do is we'll go back to our layers. We're going to go ahead and move that underneath our shadow layer for our little island and whatnot. That way now it's not going to be compromised, our shadows anyway, by the water that we just added in. Next, what we're going to do is start to emphasize some of the sky colors a little bit more. So we're going to go to our layers and we're going to tap on the sky here and create a new layer. We're going to change the layer effect from normal. We're going to go to overlay. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors. We're going to grab, say, the pink tones here. And just where we kind of got it in the sand, we're just going to kind of make our brush size a bit bigger actually. Let's go to about 4%. Just very lightly left to right. Just emphasize a little bit more of that brighter tone. So just trying to create a much more reflective look here. So a couple of streaks left and right. Maybe even go to your colors and then we'll move it to the orange here. So it is the 5th color on that top row. And where the sun is directly here, we're going to go left to right, very, very lightly in this area here, just trying to add in a nice sunny reflection. We're going to add in a couple of streaks of the orange here too, just to try and emphasize those beautiful sky colors in our sand. Like this, a nice streaky look to it. Then go to your colors and grab, say, the yellow in the top left of the palette. And again, underneath our sun, we're just going to go left to right, adding in a beautiful, like kind of reflective line almost straight down the middle. And that's going to add that beautiful reflection. Look at how that's really come to life with regards to the actual reflection in the water at the bottom. And then I'm going to go to our colors and I want to reintroduce a little bit more of, say, this color here. It is the 3rd color on that top row, and add in some more streaks and whatnot just in the sand, which is reflecting that beautiful sunset in the distance. And I'm going to switch back to the peachy color, the 2nd color on that top row, and again just start to streak in some more color. Really trying to emphasize how pretty this skyline is. Skyline? Or horizon line. Much better description. There we go, we've got some much better color in this area here. Now what we're also going to do is start to make this sand look a bit more wet. We're going to make it look like it's got some more definition to it. So we're going to go to our layers, create another new layer. We're going to drag this layer above on top of all of the other layers that are clipped to the ground. So we're going to go straight to our colors first of all, and we're going to go ahead and grab this color here. It is the 2nd color from the right in the middle row. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make our brush a little bit smaller, about 2%. And we're just going to start to streak in some blue here and there, create little big chunks of it, but just adding in some color sideways, following that nice look of the ground, avoiding somewhat some of the shadow areas, unless there's a gap in between where your streaks have sort of gone side to side. So we're just going to start to add in some color. I'm going to start to block it in a little bit more. Just random little sort of streaky looks to it. Couple more in this area here, maybe making a big section of this. Now for a minute it's going to look a little bit odd, but in a second you'll see where this really comes into play. So we've added in those streaks there. We're going to go to our layer and we're going to change the layer effect from normal. We're going to scroll down to add and we're going to reduce the opacity all the way down to 30%. Immediately that's going to give you kind of a wetter look to the ground, but then we're going to go to our adjustments, motion blur, and swipe from left to right again, and then we're going to go up to about sort of 30% just to really break up those little bits of water that we added in on the ground, and then tap on your adjustments when you're done. And now your sand should start to have a much more sort of wet look to it underneath here. We are also going to go to our layers and create one new layer again and tap on it and clipping mask it. We're going to kind of repeat that step, but we're going to go ahead and just add in some blue in these areas again. So maybe this color here on the far right column, the middle color. We're going to reduce the brush size down to about sort of 2% and just start to streak in some darker tones this time in the gaps. So if you just add in the odd little sort of speck of this in the ground, this is just going to add in some nice definition. Just to, again, every highlight deserves a shadow underneath it as well. So a little something maybe like this, and go to your adjustments, go to motion blur and swipe from left to right. And we're going to add in a nice, fairly large 40% motion blur there. I'm going to angle mine ever so slightly and tap on my adjustments when I'm done. And that way your sand again has a much more wet look to it, and every shadow deserves a highlight. Now at this stage, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and work on these little rocks down here. So kind of the same process as we did before. We're going to go to the layer and we're going to tap on it and we're going to alpha lock it. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab this gray here. It's the fourth color on that bottom row with the leather wood brush. So we're going to go back to our brushes and change that. So go to artistic for me and the leather wood by myself. And we're going to make the brush size around about sort of 4 to 5%. Going to add in some color on that top ledge here. This is relatively quick because this is so close to us, but also it's not really our main focus. It's this area here. So I'm going to add in some big chunk of color here, following that sort of motion of the actual rock. Let's also add in our little friends down here as well. So a bit of a 2% on these edges here. Just a little bit of color on them. And then go back to our colors. Let's grab this color here, the bottom of the fourth column. Brush size around about sort of 3% for this top rock here. And we're going to start to add in some more color on here. Adding in some of these lighter tones on here. Now I pressed very firm initially so that you're not going to see too much. Tiny little specks on these little fellas down here. And then just like before, we go back to our base color, bottom, or middle of the first column, should I say. Reduce the brush size down to 2% and start hacking away. So follow the curvature of the shape, maybe go a little bit more horizontal here and there just to create more nice sort of ridge lines on the rock. Give it a general nice light coat over the top. These little fellas again down here also need a little bit of love. There we go, we've got a little bit of detail on there. We want to try and darken up the back edge of it because the lighting's coming this way. So then we want to then go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here. It is the middle row, fifth color. We're going to go ahead and make our brush size around about sort of that 2 to 3% mark. And on the top edge, we're going to just start to add in some color on these areas here. Little bits of color like that. Let's zoom in. Let's add the tiniest little bit onto a couple of these. Not the very smallest ones. They're arguably too small. And then we're going to go back to our colors. Middle color in that first row, first column. And then overlap that again, hacking away into the highlights a little bit more. Give these guys a little bit of chop over the top as well. And then we're going to go to our colors again. We're going to grab the tone here, so it's the sixth color in that middle row. Brush needs to be around about 2% and gloss over the top, just adding in some of the nice brightest tones on that top edge that is nicely facing our sun there. So you can see I've added a nice big chunk of color down there. We can maybe add in like a big chunk on the top here, which is all nicely facing. A little bit on these two down here because they're a good size. And then again, we go to our colors. We go to the middle color in that first column. And I'm going to keep the brush size the same, hacking away over to the top. I'm going to make the brush size really small now, about 1%, and give it some really nice ridgy lines in there just to break that up. There we go, we've ended up with really small highlight because it's right on the other side of the rock, so it's not really doing much for us in this space. And now what we need to do is add in some shadows in the same way. So we're going to go to our layers, Let's create a new layer underneath that. So drag it underneath. Tap on the layer if it doesn't already, and it should be clipped to the ground, and that's perfect. Let's make our brush the medium brush under airbrushing. And let's make the size around about 4 or 5%. And underneath, left to right, again, just adding in a beautiful little shadow under here. Let's darken that edge up a lot more around the base. Again, we're going to motion blur this in a second, so don't spend too much time on it. Let's go down to 3%, go around that base, pushing it out a little bit more towards the left because the sun's over there, of course. A little bit more around the base of this and pushing it out towards the left. Every little one of them needs a little bit of a shadow, a little bit more like that. And darken up right around that base a little bit more. And then we're going to go to our adjustments, motion blur, swipe from left to right just to spread that out, keep the same aesthetics. I've gone up to 28% there, just to really darken that up. Tap on your adjustments when you're done. And then the next step is to, in fact, create a bit of a vignette effect. So we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. Above this rock here that we just created or painted, let's create a new layer. Let's then go to our canvas, so actions, canvas, turn on the drawing guide, and then edit the drawing guide. And we want to go to symmetry, and we want the option to be set to vertical. We're going to hit done, and we'll end up with a vertical line down the middle. We're then going to go to our brush library and the soft brush. We're going to go ahead and make the brush size around about sort of 15%. And if not bigger, let's make it a bit bigger and the opacity back up to 100%. So I'm going to go up to about sort of 20%. And then round sort of this bottom right corner, we're going to start to darken up the design a little bit. So we're just going to start to darken that up. And immediately what that does is the vignette kind of effect, which if we take a look at the layer, you kind of create this nice little curve, is going to immediately start to focus all of our attention there. Not here, but there. Get rid of all this down here. This is nicely needed to be nice and dark. It's just filler content for the main subject, which is this beautiful little area over here. Next, what we're going to go ahead and do is go to our layers. We're going to go to the vignette that we just made and swipe it to the left and duplicate it. Grab your cursor and flip it vertically and drag that till it matches up to the top edge. Then grab your layer and drag it all the way to the top of our design. It will clip itself automatically, so tap on it and unclip it. And then what we also want to do is lower the opacity down of that down to 30%. And we want to go ahead and change the layer effect from multiply. That's going to give the top area a bit of a vignette as well. Also start to darken up that cave a tiny bit. We're now going to move on to some additional lighting, which is going to be nice on our rock frame. So our front rock frame here, the layer above it is our highlights for that space. We're going to pinch the two together. We're going to create a new layer and tap on that layer and clipping mask it. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to go ahead and grab this color here, the 6th color in that middle row. We're going to go to our brush library and the soft brush. And we're going to make our brush size a bit smaller, about sort of a 10%. And very lightly just give a light coat on our rocks just over here. A little bit underneath, under there, and a little bit over here on that right edge, and a little bit under here. I'm very light with my pressure, so if again you're very heavy-handed, you may need to go ahead and reduce your opacity down. But we've added in this effect. Now just take a look at the difference of what it does. If I move this across, we turn that on and off, you end up with a nice light haze of color on top. We're going to do that for the layer in here as well. So we're going to go to our second rock frame, create a new layer, tap on that layer and clipping mask it. Let's zoom out and let's add in a light haze of color on there too. Light haze under here, really light. So that one was a little bit too strong initially, and a nice little light coat of color under here too. Let's also go up to our actions and turn off our drawing guide for a second. Now the next layer to add in a light haze to is this one here. So we're going to go to that main island. We're going to go ahead and make sure the layer is still alpha locked, which it is. I'm going to go to our colors and still make sure we're on the 6th color in the middle row. Brush size can be a bit about sort of 6% and very lightly on that right hand edge. Just give it a nice light coat. Now just very nicely give a nice light haze to it. We can then also reduce our brush size down to about sort of 2 to 3% and just very lightly on the top edge here, just sort of introduce a little more lighting, a little bit more lighting over here too, and a little light coat over there as well. We can also move on to this little fella over here too. So we're going to go down to that little island. We're going to go ahead and just on that left hand side, make the brush size a bit bigger, about 4 or 5%, and just give it a nice light coat on that left edge. So everything facing the actual sun gets a nice light coat. We're now going to add in a lens flare to the sun. So we're going to go up to our layers. Just underneath our vignette at the very, very top, we're going to create a new layer that sits underneath it. Make sure it's not clipped, so it doesn't need to have this icon here. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab this color here in the bottom right of our palette. We're going to go to our brush library and we're going to go down to the luminance section and we're going to use the flare. Now the flare size is currently set to 45%. Now what we want to do is we want to tap somewhat as close we can to the middle of our sun, a little bit like that. And then what we want to do is go to the layer and change the layer effect from normal, scroll down until we get to overlay. Now that will give us this beautiful flare that just pinches left and right of our design, and we can actually go to the layer and swipe it to the left and duplicate it. So we've got 2 of them, and that will really sort of flush out some of these really beautiful highlights on this edge and really create that gorgeous flare across the screen. Now the final step is to go ahead and add some clouds. So what we do is we go down to our sky layer, we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to change the layer effect from normal, and we're going to change it straight away to the option of screen. So we're going to change that to screen. We're then going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab this color here, the 3rd color in that middle row. We're going to go to our brush library and we're going to go to airbrushing and the medium brush. We're going to make that brush size around about sort of 2 to 3% to start with. And here on our horizon line, what we're going to do is we're just going to actually reduce our brush size smaller than that. We need to be much smaller than that, about 2%. We're just going to start to squiggle in some lines. So just squiggle in some lines up and down. Let them just run horizontally. They can run quite close to each other, but we're just going to run in some lines in here. You can make some a little bit higher and chunkier than the others. I'm just going to do that especially down towards our horizon. The odd little bit. And just to focus on an area for a second, we're then going to reduce the brush size down to 1%. And on the underside of each one of these, just squiggle in some extra colour. So I'm going to make my brush size a bit bigger than that 1% before, but just go underside of all of these little clouds that you just made. Leave gaps, don't make it too consistent, and just squiggle in some beautiful colour on the underside of all of these little areas. And when you zoom out, you'll end up with these beautiful clouds. So we just need to repeat that. So we go back to sort of 1 to 2%, create some really nice sort of squiggles in here, create them, make sure they're nice and random. They don't want to be too horizontal. So you want to create some nice bumps and lumps in here. I'm going to actually join them together a little bit. I'm going to create some nice squiggles up here above that little beautiful flare. I'm going to go ahead and go somewhat up to the sort of the pinky areas. We don't want to add in too many, but we don't want to sort of leave it that it's a bit too bare towards the top. So we just want to add in a few. You can go back in and very lightly just sort of fluff them out. I'm keeping my pressure super light. Again, if you're a little bit heavy-handed, maybe just drop the opacity down. They want to be super light and gentle like this. And I'm going to add in one more up here, and then I'll be done with this sort of side over here for a moment. And then reduce that brush size down to 1% again, and just on the underside towards each cloud, you just want to sort of squiggle in some much brighter tones. So feel free to just press quite firm, dab a few times just to really brighten up certain ones. Don't do every single one either, because you'll make them all very consistent to one another. But just the odd little speck of colour that's facing our sun, so maybe even slightly towards the right hand side of each underside of each cloud. We can maybe brighten that up a little bit more. When you zoom out, you'll end up with these beautiful clouds in the distance. We can then do the same over here in this little gap. So we make our brush size around about 1% and we just squiggle, creating some nice fluffy clouds. More so towards our horizon line, these will look great. Just create some nice squiggle lines. Some more squiggle lines up here. See how kind of random and fluffy I'm trying to make them, and trying not to be very repetitive. I'm going to try and leave some gaps here and there. We're not too interested if they get too close to the sun. We want to kind of leave the sun alone, let that be the focal point, so that there's a nice big gap in there. And then again, just go back in with your brush and just a bit smaller, just underside of each one where possible, just sort of brighten that up where it's facing our sun. It's getting a good amount of that underlighting. Look at that come to life. Nice, beautiful cloud work. Little specks here and there. The odd tiny little cloud here and there looks great, like a tiny little streak in the sky. I'm going to actually move across and go back over to here and do exactly that. So just the odd little sort of streak will look great. More squiggles underneath that one just to break that up a little bit more. You'll end up with these beautiful sort of clouds in there. And you can, if you want to, just go to the layer. Maybe even grab your eraser and the airbrush and the soft brush. And maybe just erase the top edges of them. So make them about sort of 7% with your eraser and just fade them out. Let them just be nice and faint towards the top and more so towards your horizon. So try not to get a bit too precious over them a little bit, but just allow them to just fade out into the distance. Now this stage of the design is where I always tend to make little adjustments and let you know what adjustments I would make. So I'm going to do exactly that. We're going to go to our layers. We're going to go down to this sort of shadow layer here. I'm going to go back and grab this color here, the middle color on the far left column. And with my brush set to the medium brush, I'm just going to start to just bring this shadow a little bit closer to us. So just a little bit more on this left edge. I want to really sort of create that focal point towards the center. I'm going to just darken that up a little bit more and again just push it out to the right. So these are always sort of final adjustments, but I like to include them because I think it's great for you to see then what I would change. Therefore, we're all sort of on the same page. I'm going to nicely just thicken up the center area of this shadow a little bit more. I want to really sort of darken that up towards the center point of that shadow. There we go, that's looking a lot nicer. I also want to go back to the layer that's set to overlay that's on the water here. And I want to grab it, I want to go to my colors and I want to grab, say, this yellow here, this really bright yellow. So it's the 6th color on that top row, and just really brighten up this sun here. I want this to look really, really bright and beautiful. Adding in a nice amount of color, maybe even make the brush size a bit bigger just to push it left and right. Likewise, then I also want to go back to my colors and grab, say, this peach tone and just maybe just introduce a little bit more color in this reflection. If not, even grab my colors and grab the orange too. And just start to streak in a little bit more orange just right beside that yellow, which is going to make it look a lot more burnt in there. It's going to look great. And then the other adjustment I want to make is actually on the water. So I'm going to go to the layer that's got the blue on. See that layer there? We're going to go to the color and we're going to grab this yellow here, which is our horizon line and our sun color. Reduce the brush size down, still medium brush, and just push a little bit of yellow around on the horizon, around that right hand side of the water. Likewise, let's just brighten that water up in that gap there too, just to really show how nice and bright that is, breaking through that gap. Now the only other adjustment would actually probably be the sky, and this is something I recommend you can spend as much time as you want on. So if I actually go to that sky layer here, we just want to sort of change our color to the 2nd color on that top row, and I would just spend some time just streaking this in until I get exactly the right effect that I want. So just streaking in some more color in here and just seeing what you can come up with and seeing how you can just really separate the colors from one another. Grab, say, this color here. These two are pretty vital. So this color here, the 3rd one on that middle row as well, and just streak that in too and just see what you can come up with. Go back over with the blue, go back over with the dark blue and kind of break up your sky. See what nice, beautiful, hazy sort of looks you can give. I'm going to go back to the blue, for example, and just start to overlay that, break them up, streak and streak and streaking. Keeping it at 75% will do exactly that. You'll create some really beautiful, streaky work in your sky, and it will look fantastic. And just keep going back over yourself, keep going back over, changing up the color, introducing more of, say, a particular tone if you prefer that, like the orange and the pinky purple color, this one here, and just streak away, keep creating it. And if you go too far, you'll just maybe need to reintroduce the gradient again from earlier on, so just whiz back to that stage. But otherwise you can spend as much time just creating a really beautiful streaky sky at the back, which will just kind of like add a little bit more detail really. And you can always go back in, for example, say with this peach color, set your brush to the soft brush instead under airbrushing and lightly coat over the top, which will then blend all your colors a little bit again back together. And then likewise go back in with the pink purple color, streak them back in, and again go back in with the blue, blend them all back in. So you're kind of overlaying the color backwards and forwards on top of one another. And truthfully, I'm really happy with how that sky looks back there as well. So I'm going to pinch with 2 fingers, going to go full screen with 4, and we end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. As always, be sure to let me know in the comments if you like this type of content, and always share your designs with me over on Instagram. I can't wait to see what you guys get up to. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you didn't already know, I post weekly tutorials over on my Patreon as well. So if you'd like more tutorials like this, you can find them over there on Patreon. There's a link in the description down below. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.